operation is preventing a nuclear Iran, will you acknowledge that there is an economic cost to the American people for doing what you believe is necessary to make Iran denuclear? Will you acknowledge the economic cost?
We have an incredible economic team that's managing this better than
but
what the previous administration did to our economy, what the previous administration did with inflation, what the previous administration did with COVID, and you're going to lecture this administration about the economy?
You know what is upsetting?
Incredible.
You didn't even do the analysis on how much it's costing the American people.
Representative Ro Khanna just asked Secretary Pete Hegseth a series of very simple questions. How much has this war actually cost? How much are American families paying in higher gas and food prices? How much did it cost when American missiles hit an Iranian school? Secretary Pete Hegseth could not answer a single one. Not one number. Not one straight answer. And Representative Ro Khanna had the receipts to prove it. Let me show you exactly what happened.
As a gentleman from California, Mr. Khanna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Hegseth, tomorrow is 2 months since the war has begun. You've testified that it was $25 billion in cost in terms of the munitions we used and what we paid for it. But when you add to that the damage that was done to our bases and today's dollars for buying replacement munitions and replacement aircrafts, what has the total cost been over the last 60 days?
That number right now reflects the total cost that we're seeing.
Including buying in today's dollars the new weapons and replacements, and including the damage there? That's your testimony?
If there's adjustments to that, I would defer to the comptroller on that.
And how much are you seeing in terms of, are you asking in terms of supplemental funding just for the Iran mission from this committee?
If and when a supplemental is submitted,
how much?
The majority of it would not just be for,
But what would be the ballpark for Iran?
Munitions related to the entirety
Just
of what
number,
we want to
sir.
get done.
A number, what would you submit? What
It would be within on Iran, it would be less than $25 billion, but there's a lot more we would ask for beyond just Iran.
You're saying it's $25 billion. Okay, I would just, if you come back, you want to revise those numbers, because all the experts are disagreeing with you when it comes to today's dollars and damage, but you can revise it. How much did it cost American taxpayers in terms of the strike to the Iranian school where kids were killed? Do you have that number in terms of the missiles we used?
As I've said, that unfortunate situation remains under investigation.
You don't know how much it costs the taxpayer?
But I wouldn't tie a cost to that, to anything.
It's a reasonable question, no, sir? I mean, our taxpayer money was going there. Do you know how much it will cost Americans in terms of their increased cost in gas and food over the next year because of the Iran war?
I would simply ask you what the cost is of an Iranian nuclear bomb.
I'm going to give you that opportunity.
I would simply ask you what the... you're playing gotcha questions about
no,
domestic things. I'm not...
You're saying it's a gotcha question to ask what it's going to be in terms of the increased cost of gas.
Why won't you answer what it costs to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb?
I give you that, sir, but let me...
What would it cost? What would you pay to ensure Iran doesn't get a nuclear bomb? What would you pay?
I reclaim my time. Do you not know, you had no one do the analysis of what the increased cost of gas and food on the American people are going to be?
What is the cost of Iran holding that straight at issue with nuclear weapons?
It's $631 billion, which means it's an increase of $5,000 a year for American households. Now, let me give you this point. You're saying that your operation is preventing a nuclear Iran. Will you acknowledge that there is an economic cost to the American people for doing what you believe is necessary to make Iran denuclear? Will you acknowledge the economic cost?
We have an incredible economic team that's managing this better than
what
the previous administration did to our economy, what the previous administration did with inflation, what the previous administration did with COVID, and you're going to lecture this administration about the economy?
You know what is upsetting?
Incredible.
You didn't even do the analysis on how much it's costing the American people. It's one thing if you said, okay, it costs the American people $5,000, but we think it's worth it. That's what we've done in World War II and other wars. Here's what it costs. You got to pay for it. You don't even know what the average American is paying. You don't know what we paid in terms of the missiles that hit the Iranian school. You don't know what we're paying in terms of gas. You don't know what we're paying in terms of food. Your $25 billion number is totally off. It's the incompetence. It's the incompetence. Let me ask you this. Certainly maybe here we'll find agreement. There were still 440 pounds of low-enriched uranium, correct, when President Obama, after the JCPOA? Is that accurate?
The amounts and types are classified.
Okay. Will you acknowledge that there were 970 pounds of uranium enriched after Trump tore up the JCPOA?
The JCPOA was a terrible deal that allowed Iran a path to a nuclear bomb.
You deal with vague platitudes. I'm asking you about numbers. Like, you don't know what gas costs, you don't know what food costs, you don't know what the operation costs. You know, I get sound bites, but how about numbers? Do you know how much the enriched uranium was after you ripped up the JCPOA? Trump did.
I'll give you a number. I know that, as was stated by early on, the price of gas is twice as expensive in California, your home state, as anywhere else in the country because of the horrible policies your state pursued.
You know what? It used to be that that type of stuff worked, and then you started to lose the people that you campaigned you wanted to be for, because you said you wouldn't get us into bad wars. You said you would bring down the prices. You know what I'm sad for? I'm sad for all the people who voted for Trump. I'm sad for them because you betrayed them. You betrayed a lot of that MAGA base. And you know who knows that? J.D. Vance knows that.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Bacon.
Okay, so let us start with the very first question, because it sets up everything that follows. Representative Ro Khanna opens by pointing out that tomorrow marks 2 months since this war began. 2 months. And Representative Ro Khanna wants to know what those 2 months actually cost. Now, Secretary Pete Hegseth has already testified that the war cost $25 billion. But Representative Ro Khanna is not just asking about munitions fired. Representative Ro Khanna is asking about the full picture. He says, when you add to that the damage done to our own bases and the cost of buying replacement munitions and replacement aircraft at today's prices, what has the total cost actually been over the last 60 days? And Secretary Pete Hegseth says, that number, the $25 billion, reflects the total cost including buying replacements at today's prices and including the damage. Representative Ro Khanna pushes back immediately. Representative Ro Khanna says, all the experts are disagreeing with you when it comes to today's dollars and damage. And Representative Ro Khanna gives Secretary Pete Hegseth an opportunity to revise that number if he needs to come back with better information. Now that alone should concern every American. Secretary Pete Hegseth is sitting in front of Congress 2 months into a war, giving a cost number that experts are already saying does not add up. And yet he sits there with confidence as though the numbers do not matter, as though Congress does not deserve accuracy, as though the truth is somehow optional when you are spending other people's money. But Representative Ro Khanna is just getting started, because the $25 billion number is not even the most important number in this conversation. Representative Ro Khanna moves to the next question, and this is the one that Secretary Pete Hegseth really does not want to answer. Representative Ro Khanna asks, how much did it cost American taxpayers in terms of the strike on the Iranian school where children were killed? How much did the missiles cost that hit that school? And Secretary Pete Hegseth says that unfortunate situation remains under investigation. Representative Ro Khanna says, you do not know. Secretary Pete Hegseth says he would not tie a cost to that. Representative Ro Khanna says, it is a reasonable question. And Secretary Pete Hegseth says, no, sir. No, sir. Secretary Pete Hegseth is telling a member of Congress that asking how much American taxpayer money was spent on missiles that killed children at a school is not a reasonable question. Let that sink in. American missiles, American taxpayer money, children killed at a school. And Secretary Pete Hegseth says, it is not reasonable to ask what that cost. Those children had names, those children had families, and the American people have a right to know what their money paid for. Now Representative Ro Khanna moves to the third question. And this one is about every American family sitting at home right now, feeling the pain of this war in their wallet. Representative Ro Khanna asks, do you know how much it will cost Americans in terms of their increased cost in gas and food over the next year because of the Iran war? And Secretary Pete Hegseth does not answer. Secretary Pete Hegseth says, I would simply ask you what the cost is of an Iranian nuclear bomb. Representative Ro Khanna tries to get his time back. Secretary Pete Hegseth keeps going. Secretary Pete Hegseth says, what would you pay to ensure Iran does not get a nuclear bomb? Representative Ro Khanna reclaims his time. And then Representative Ro Khanna does something very important. Representative Ro Khanna provides the number that Secretary Pete Hegseth could not. Representative Ro Khanna says, The increased cost of gas and food on the American people is $631 billion. That is an increase of $5,000 a year for the average American household. $5,000 a year per household. That is not a talking point. That is not a political attack. That is the real economic cost of this war, being paid right now by regular American families every single time they fill up their tank and every single time they go to the grocery store. And Secretary Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, did not have that number, did not even attempt to calculate that number, did not ask anyone to calculate that number. Now, Representative Ro Khanna is not saying the war was necessarily wrong. Representative Ro Khanna makes a very fair point here. Representative Ro Khanna says, look, you are saying this operation is preventing a nuclear Iran. Will you at least acknowledge that there is an economic cost to the American people for doing what you believe is necessary? That is a completely reasonable ask. In World War II, American leaders told the American people, this is what the war costs. This is what you are paying, and this is why it is worth it. That is called being honest with the people you serve. That is called respect for the American public. Representative Ro Khanna says, it is one thing if you say, okay, it is costing the American people $5,000, but we think it is worth it. That is what leaders did in World War II and other wars. Here is what it costs. You have to pay for it. But Secretary Pete Hegseth cannot even do that. Secretary Pete Hegseth does not acknowledge the cost. Secretary Pete Hegseth does not say it is worth it. Secretary Pete Hegseth does not say anything meaningful, except that the previous administration was worse. And Representative Ro Khanna calls that out directly. Representative Ro Khanna says, you do not even know what the average American is paying. You do not know what we paid in terms of the missiles that hit the Iranian school. You do not know what we are paying in terms of gas. You do not know what we are paying in terms of food. Your $25 billion number is totally off. And then Representative Ro Khanna says two words. The incompetence. The incompetence. Now Representative Ro Khanna moves to a completely different line of questioning. And this part is about nuclear weapons directly. Representative Ro Khanna asks, will you acknowledge that after the Iran nuclear deal known as the JCPOA under President Obama, Iran had only 440 pounds of low-enriched uranium? Secretary Pete Hegseth says, the amounts and types are classified. Representative Ro Khanna then asks, will you acknowledge that after President Trump ripped up the JCPOA, Iran's enriched uranium grew to 970 pounds? Secretary Pete Hegseth does not confirm the number. Secretary Pete Hegseth says, the JCPOA was a terrible deal that gave Iran a path to a nuclear bomb. And Representative Ro Khanna makes a point that cuts right to the heart of this entire hearing. Representative Ro Khanna says, you deal in vague platitudes. I am asking you about numbers. You do not know what gas costs. You do not know what food costs. You do not know what the operation costs. I get sound bites, but how about numbers? That is the whole problem. Secretary Pete Hegseth, the man running the United States military, the man who has spent $25 billion or more of American taxpayer money in 60 days, cannot tell Congress or the American people what anything actually costs. He cannot tell them what the missiles cost that hit the school. He cannot tell them what families are paying in higher gas prices. He cannot tell them what families are paying in higher food prices. He cannot confirm how much enriched uranium Iran had before and after the decisions that led to this war. He just says, what would you pay to stop a nuclear bomb? And Representative Ro Khanna closes with something that goes beyond policy, beyond numbers, beyond the hearing room. Representative Ro Khanna says, you know what I am sad for? I am sad for all the people who voted for Trump. I am sad for them because you betrayed them. You said you would not get us into bad wars. You said you would bring down prices. And you know who knows that you betrayed them? J.D. Vance knows that. Now that is a significant statement, because Representative Ro Khanna is not just criticizing Secretary Pete Hegseth. Representative Ro Khanna is pointing directly at the people who trusted this administration, who voted for lower prices, who voted against foreign wars, and who are now paying $5,000 more a year because of a war they were promised would not happen. So here is exactly where we are. Representative Ro Khanna asked Secretary Pete Hegseth, what is the true total cost of this war? Secretary Pete Hegseth gave a number that experts say is wrong. Representative Ro Khanna asked Secretary Pete Hegseth, how much did the missiles cost that hit the Iranian school where children died? Secretary Pete Hegseth said it was not a reasonable question. Representative Ro Khanna asked Secretary Pete Hegseth, how much are American families paying in higher gas and food prices because of this war? Secretary Pete Hegseth did not have the number. Representative Ro Khanna had to provide it himself. $631 billion. $5,000 more per American household, every single year. Children killed at a school. Missiles Secretary Pete Hegseth refuses to put a price on. A $25 billion number that experts say does not add up. And a Secretary of Defense who responds to every hard question with a soundbite instead of a number. Representative Ro Khanna is right. You do not know what gas costs. You do not know what food costs. You do not know what this operation costs. And the American people, especially the ones who voted for this administration, deserve so much better than that. Share this. Talk about this. Because $5,000 a year is not a soundbite. That is real money, coming out of real pockets, of real American families, who were promised something very different from the people now running this war. And those families are still waiting for someone in that room to tell them the truth.